You're listening to Offer Accepted, the show that is all about fostering careers in real estate and growing your real estate team. Your host is Vanessa Rosenblum. Vanessa is the president of a search firm called Pro R.E.A. Staffing, where they help real estate agents hire talented people so that they can grow their businesses. On this show, Vanessa interviews real estate industry professionals from real estate assistants to team leaders of mega teams to learn how they achieved their current level of success and what they're doing to rise to the next level in their career or business. Whether you are exploring a career in real estate or you currently run a large real estate team and you want to be better at recruiting, training, and managing your employees and agents, this is a show you'll want to follow, so don't forget to hit subscribe. All right, let's go to the show. Here's your host, Vanessa.
Hello and welcome to the podcast. I'm your host, Vanessa Rosenblum, and with me today is Paisley Vartanian. Now, in my first few episodes, I interviewed people who were leaders of real estate teams. They were director of operations or team leaders, and I thought today we would take a different approach and look at a different type of career path. So Paisley is a transaction coordinator, and she has a long and interesting career working in real estate as a transaction coordinator and in other roles. So I thought what we would do today is explore her career path and talk about what a transaction coordinator does, what that lifestyle is like, what you can expect if you decide to become a transaction coordinator, and if you're an agent, what are some of the things that you should be looking for or expecting from your transaction coordinator. So we'll cover both sides of the coin today. Now, I want to mention that Paisley lives and works in the San Francisco Bay Area. And as many listeners may know, California is an escrow state. So in escrow states, transaction coordinators play a very big role in managing the contract to close process. Now, if you're in a lawyer state, your process might be a little bit different. And so some of the things we talk about today might not completely align with how things work in your state. So just be attuned to that. But with that, I just want to welcome you, Paisley. Thank you for joining me today.
Thank you for having me, Vanessa. I'm excited to be here.
So let's just start at the top. How did you get into real estate in the first place?
I got into real estate after doing some eclectic jobs after college. I applied for a marketing position at a boutique firm on the peninsula in San Francisco called Cash & Company, and I was hired into their marketing position.
So your first role in real estate, you're doing marketing. What did you think when you first walked into that real estate office and you saw that environment? What was your impression?
It was very different than I had expected. I had expected a more corporate environment, and I didn't realize at the time that real estate agents are actually contractors. Again, now some of the business models for some brokerages have changed, but for the most part, they're still traditional, where the agents are contractors that come in and go at their leisure and run their business each individually very differently.
Right. So you are handling marketing for the office, and this was the early 2000s, right?
Yes. And I was handling marketing for the office, and we would send it to corporate, the corporate marketing department. And then I was also handling individualized marketing for open houses and certain listings and sales for the individualized agents. So they all had their own needs.
And so how did you transition from that into the transaction coordinator role?
When the in-house transaction coordinator went on maternity leave, I was approached to go ahead and train and take her position. And they weren't sure if it would be in the interim or long term. They wanted to go ahead and give her that flexibility and no pressure. So they also wanted me to understand that and make sure that that was okay. And I jumped at the opportunity because the person who trained me was amazing, and I had a lot of admiration for her. So I was like, if she thinks I can do it, I want to try.
So talk about that learning curve as you started to learn the transactions. Obviously, you have to understand a process and a lot of terminology and contracts. What did she do that helped train you on that process that made sense for you?
She was direct and very articulate, and everything else she let be white noise. She took the emotion out of the transaction and got right down to the details. And so that helped me understand not only the documents, the understanding of the signers and parties involved, but also the importance of the timeline.
Right. It's all about the timeline. So it's such a different uses a different part of your brain, and usually it's a very different personality. The type of person who wants to do marketing versus the person who gravitates to transaction coordinating. So when you have that experience to work on both sides in the same office, can you sort of compare and contrast what are some of the skills or traits of somebody who's probably better on the marketing side or someone who's better on the transaction coordinator side of the business?
Yeah, so I would say two things that they have in common and is one, attention to detail, because both you have, one is for editing and one is for executing. The other one is they both have in common timelines. You both need to execute in a timely fashion. I would say that for someone in marketing, it would be something a little more consistent. There's an evolution of marketing that's very consistent. You get it ready for print, you do the edit, then you send it back. And there's this easy flow that everybody knows and follows. Whereas with a transaction coordinator, it can be a bit of controlled chaos, and the controlled part comes from the transaction coordinator oftentimes. And so being able to be a controller in chaotic situations is a very important trait.
Now, you were pretty early in your career back then, right? So what was that like for you to have to manage all of the different parties in the transaction and really, like you said, take control of the situation? Was that intimidating? Did you relish that opportunity? What was that like for you?
I think for me back then, it was very intimidating, and I took the more passive approach. So there's different approaches you can take, and in some ways, there's good cop, bad cop, there's the passive or the direct, and then there's also aggressive. I definitely took the more passive approach, and I let the agents guide me, and in some cases too far, and I let them take advantage of me. They're all great people, don't get me wrong, and I think sometimes people don't realize when they're taking advantage of a situation, but having been seasoned in the industry now, I would train very differently on how to approach.
Right. So let's talk about that. We'll fast forward and then we'll go backwards. So at this point in your career, how do you maintain control of all of the parties involved, and when do you know when to push back or push things forward, and when to be flexible?
The key thing for me is understanding that you need to front load your files, whether you're on the listing side or the sales files. You really want to get everything done as soon as possible. It's not only to the benefit of the transaction coordinator, but everybody on the file. If there's any discrepancies that come up or anything that brings a red flag or question mark for the buyer or the seller, it can be handled in a more timely fashion. So front loading the documents, the disclosures, whether they're statutory or optional, really getting them all ahead of the game is wonderful for everybody. And at the same time, for a transaction coordinator, then you can kind of sit back and relax. And then when those hiccups do happen in the transaction, you're not bogged down with like a million things to do for this one transaction, because you've already front loaded it and you were anticipating a hiccup. And if the hiccups don't happen, then it's smooth sailing and it's a great transaction.
Perfect. All right. So how long were you in that original transaction coordinator position?
I was originally in that position for about 3 years or so, and then I ended up moving officially out of the industry into executive search.
Right. So you did executive search for a while, but you never really got all the way out of the industry. So what happened?
No. So I had a couple of agents that really enjoyed working with me, and they weren't willing to give me up. And so they went ahead and continued using me as their transaction coordinator. So it really allowed me to create my own little business on my terms, because one, they respected me and appreciated it and understood that I was doing a full-time job in addition to their file. And then it allowed me to stay in touch in the real estate business and really educate myself a little further in more of a hobby way, where it was passion rather than a need to put dinner on the table or whatnot. It was on my own timeline.
And how did you manage that? I'm just trying to picture how you manage transactions when you're working a full-time job. How did you balance that?
Yeah, so today it's very different, but then I was doing a lot of time blocking, and again, the front loading the file is essential for the success of a transaction coordinator. So I front loaded the file, and I really watched that my communication not only met the timelines, but it was very concise and articulate. So back to my original training, both my managing broker and the transaction coordinator that trained me, they really taught me the order of operations in a transaction, and how to be efficient and concise and articulate. And so that's how I like to man my files every time, is to make sure that if I'm reaching out to you, it's with substance. Not only am I going to be asking you for something, but I will likely be giving you something if you need it. Sometimes when I was working the full-time job and transaction coordinator, the feedback I would get is sometimes people wanted more handling. They wanted more communication. And so that was one downfall, is because I didn't have time for that managing of just, hi, just checking in. It was really like, if I had something to say or needed something from you, that's when I would communicate. Otherwise, you can assume everything is good. And some people just don't like to work that way.
Right, definitely. All right, so then at some point you decided to get your real estate license. What was your motivation for getting licensed? Because to be a transaction coordinator, you don't necessarily have to be licensed, right?
Right, correct. So I received my So I received my real estate license while I was still at Cash & Company. And the motivation for that was I needed some sort of validation of my own skill set. As I was getting feedback from agents and seeing the large incomes that they were making, I needed to prove to myself that I was knowledgeable and capable. And so I felt the need to take the exam.
But you didn't go out and sell right away, right?
No, the commission base always has made me nervous. And then the other thing is I'm more of an introvert. So I'm a really good negotiator. I'm really good at sales, but I'm even better behind the computer. And I think knowing that has been important to my career trajectory.
So you decided to come back in at some point. At what point did you decide to come back full-time into real estate?
So around 2012, I finally hung my license at Keller Williams, and I was teetering back and forth as to whether or not I would actually do the sales portion, but I was still consistently doing transaction coordination. And then in 2013, I had my sons and ended up trying to balance being a new mom and wondering if I wanted to go into the sales portion. So I did dabble into sales alongside my transaction coordination. And I really love meeting people and I love talking to them. But again, there was just something so vulnerable about it as well. And I'm not a cutthroat competitor with other agents in the area. And so in some ways, I felt like some of my marketing material was great. It was educational and it was an anchor, but it actually helped the competitors do their business and get the listing than me because they had a name for themselves. So with that, I ended up being asked by one of my agents to interview for a new company, a prop tech brokerage. And after multiple requests over a period of a year, I finally gave in and I interviewed with the company and ended up taking an exclusive contract with them for both agent and transaction coordination work.
Perfect. Can you explain what a prop tech company is and some of the changes that you're seeing in the industry right now?
Absolutely. So a prop tech company is anything, a technology company that has to do with real estate or property. It could be property management, development. This specific company was an app-based brokerage.
Got it. Okay. So you manage transactions, you trained other transaction coordinators, and then at some point you decided you were ready to go back out on your own. Is that right?
Yeah. So I've, as you do when you grow, you're ready to try something new. And so I recently left that exclusive agreement. And now I'm starting my own company, Assistant.Real Estate, which primary focus is on transaction coordination, but also helping merge the technology real estate divide.
Perfect. So let's talk about the career path for a typical transaction coordinator. So, in my experience, most TCs start out working for a brokerage or a team, and then eventually they grow out on their own. Talk about some of the pros and cons of working in a brokerage or in an office versus being an independent TC.
Absolutely. So working inside a brokerage, there's some benefits because you have the team morale, you have the regular meetings that you're getting these tidbits of education and what's going on in the industry. And you also have training that 90% of the time, the broker is paying you while you're getting trained. And then they're also validating the training and giving you that affirmation throughout the process. So training on a listing or a sales can take a year sometimes for people to really feel good about the disclosures, especially here in California. So having that, I don't want to say a crutch, I want to say that support, because it's very positive, and it by no means does it mean someone's weak if they're using this method to get into the industry.
It also seems like it reduces your liability because you do have that support and that training versus, taking a course and then hanging up a shingle and saying that you're now a transaction coordinator, right? You need a little more training and support than just like a TC 101 course.
Absolutely. So if you're working independent, there are some people that just jump in and they've been executive assistants or they just have a knack for it right away, and they'll just start their business without a class or anything. And the thing to think about that is you can rely on your one-on-one relationships to help guide you, because everybody needs to follow what's compliant for the broker checklist. But you also need to be able to know that you know how to and where to get the due diligence for the specifics on your transaction or listing. If you're independent, it would be wise and appropriate to have your own liability insurance and whatnot for your business. And I think it's important to think that when you are a transaction coordinator, that you are an independent transaction coordinator, you are a business. And I think that's something that a lot of us transaction coordinators go, oh, wait a minute. Yeah, I'm just a contractor. Oh, no, you are a business and you're running a business, and you need to switch that mindset and take yourself out of it a little bit and make sure that you make a P&L and you track your profit and everything.
Right, exactly. Thank you for talking about that. Now let's just go through what a day in the life of a transaction coordinator looks like. You come into your office, and then how does your day unfold?
So it really depends on how the individual transaction coordinator works. We all have our own tips and tricks and systems, and some of us just like our handy dandy notebook. So it really depends on your work style. And I think that's really important. A transaction coordinator usually is someone that's very intrinsic to knowing what their needs are. And they're able to have a specific learning type. And more often than not, people have labeled them as being particular. And I think that's a great trait to have when you're a transaction coordinator. So that said, every transaction coordinator having their own system, on average, what you can expect is you'll come in the morning, and some offices start at different times, especially if you're independent, you call your own hours, but you'll have a slew of emails, you'll have various tasks that you'll need to get done, and you need to prioritize the order of operations, which are best for not only the transaction itself, but also all of your transactions in your business. And so being able to really pick the important things out is very important. For me, I actually do a lot of my detailed review work in the evening, and then I schedule my emails to go out in the morning so people have them right in their inbox when they wake up in the morning or when they're first in the office. And then I time block, which I find valuable to do my meetings or my telephone calls throughout the day, usually in the afternoon, because that's when most people are more free for those types of engagements. And then you can schedule inspections for the afternoon, because most people can come home early from work if they want to be there for them and whatnot.
So how do you keep yourself organized? What software programs are you using to manage your files?
Right now, I am using TC Workflow, and Shane is the founder, and I absolutely love it. It has a way about it that breaks down the tasks to where they're not overwhelming. He can give you either a 1-day, 3-day, or 7-day perspective, and it follows the transaction from ratification to close. So it's a really nice product that you can even templatize to not only your needs, a brokerage's needs, or an individual agent's needs.
Say the name of the program again.
TC Workflow.
TC Workflow, great. Go ahead.
Sorry, TC Workflow is really good for someone who's working off of the G Suite. There are other programs like TC Docs that is better suited for Evernote.
Perfect. So G Suite, I'm sure most of you guys know this, that's for the Google suite of products. So Gmail, Drive, all of that. Okay, so if somebody is interviewing TCs and they're looking for a new TC to hire, what are some of the questions they should ask? What are some of the things that they should clue into to determine if someone's going to be an effective partner for them with their files?
So I don't ask the typical questions. I ask random questions that catch people off guard, and then I do the assessment evaluation based off of that. The first thing a team or individual should look at is what are your own attributes? And what are your opportunities for improvement? Because you really want your TC to elevate your opportunities for improvement. So once you have that, I think individualizing your questions for those areas are very important. It's easy to hire a TC, but this is a people business, and you want to make sure that you have that chemistry, not only personally with the type of tone and demeanor you have with one another, but also your work styles.
And if you're interviewing, let's say you're an agent, you're hiring a transaction coordinator for your team, what are some industries or previous roles that tend to be good transitional roles for new transaction coordinators?
Anything to do with project management, legal. I think executive search transfers well over, and I think someone that has been in an industry that shows grit and resilience and that they persevere, because really you want that transaction coordinator to take the file and run to the finish line and handle all of the different obstacles along the way flawlessly and positively that supports the branding of your business.
I love that you talked about that, because I want to talk about the way you set up your files when you first get an accepted offer and you're sending instructions to escrow and you're setting the stage for that transaction. How do you communicate with the client and the other people involved so that things get started out on the right foot?
Oftentimes an agent will introduce their transaction coordinator at first. It really depends not only on the state on how they regulate transaction coordinators, but also on how the agent or the brokerage runs their business. So first of all, having that partnership with your agent and your transaction coordinator to know who's making the introduction is key, because that starts off the communication well. And I think that it's really important also to know the parameters. Does your agent want you to copy them all the time, or just sometimes, or just certain important emails? And then you'll send the introduction email copying those pertinent parties. You'd be amazed on how many times you don't know who you're supposed to copy, and you really need to ask those questions. Some agents just expect you to take it and run with it in the way that's in their head, but they haven't really communicated what that is. So really taking charge of that and then communicating to those terms.
And as you're moving through the transaction, talk about some of the ways that you push things forward. Like you said, grit and resilience is definitely key in a role like this, because sometimes the people you're dealing with aren't doing their job and they're not doing what they're supposed to be doing. And your job is to wrangle them to get them on board so you can get it closed. So can you give some examples of the way you communicate or the way you follow up when the other people in the transaction aren't doing their job, or aren't, showing up?
Well, you'll be amazed. Sometimes the agent that's contracted you is actually one that's not showing up too. And I think that an important trait of a transaction coordinator is to always make your agent look shining bright. So even if your agent or your client is not giving you what you need to execute, making sure that you're being professional and still partnering with your agent, even though they may not be doing their partnering side. So always keeping that image, I think, is really important. But secondly, A great way is, again, not only communication. I usually try to do email 2 times and then a phone call. A lot of transaction coordinators work over email. A lot of agents do now too, but there are those that don't, and they prefer telephone still. I still have agents that use fax machines. So, so really understanding that you're working the gambit of technology and communication styles and being flexible to that. You can be kind and assertive to get what you need in a file simply by being direct. It's by no means is it causing conflict. And I think that's the biggest misconception. You're not telling them they're not doing their job. They may have had it for the last 2 weeks and it's sitting on their desk. They just, for some reason, maybe their scanner broke and they can't scan it to you, or whatever it may be. So always keeping positive. Oh, by the way, I don't have this. And then if for some reason you're still not getting it after phone calls and emails, utilize your title company, find out when people are signing, and let everybody know, though, that that's where final documents will be if they're not signed at that point. So that way there's no surprises. And if clients at either side can still go to their agent with any questions. Really, there shouldn't be any at that point, but, it happens.
Yeah. So what I think a lot of transaction coordinators love about the job is that even though there's a process that is more or less the same every single time, every transaction takes on a life of its own, and unique and different issues come up, and there's always something new to learn. Can you just give listeners a couple examples of sort of off-the-wall things that have happened in transactions and how you had to bring everything back to the table?
Oh, boy. Well, some of them are confidential, but the ones that I feel comfortable talking about, there's been times that agents have had to come to my home to give me a document or whatnot, and it's just those kind of where the professional meets the personal and then crosses the boundaries. Those happen a lot. But you always hear about those transactions that get canceled because someone just bought a car. The buyer bought a car, and so now they don't qualify, or something crazy like that. So I think having a transaction coordinator that can keep it level and non-emotional is very valuable.
And give everyone a sense of how many transactions a TC can handle at a time. What's a typical workload?
Yeah, so typical I think is very different, especially between in-house and independent. So as well as what technologies you're using. So an independent, or I'll just go by technology. So someone who's working off of hard copy files usually maxes out their workload about 30 to 40 files. And someone who's working with a technology like TC Workflow or some other of the great platforms that are out there can handle sometimes up to 200 files per month. And, they might not close per month, but those are like active living files at different stages of the transaction. And so they have various needs. So some might be a little more mild on how work heavy they are, and some might be exceedingly heavy.
That's a huge difference. It's incredible how much leverage you can get out of a piece of technology. It's just mind-blowing that not everybody can get on board with a paperless transaction system. What
Absolutely.
is it about those systems that gives you so much leverage? Is it the way they organize your tasks, or what is it that gives you that kind of flexibility?
Each platform has their own uniqueness. Different ones will let you templatize different transaction needs for the type of transaction. Say, if it's an HOA or if it's a single family residence or whatever it may be. And so that way your tasks are very more intuitive, and you don't have to do additional research or go to another system each time that you're working on a file. The other thing is some of them do have built-in templates for your emails, and which can also be templatized to your checklist at a certain time of a transaction, which to me, that's invaluable. I hate drafting the same email the whole time or remembering when to put an email out. So if a system can handle that, it takes so much of the thinking out of it that I think sometimes you get bogged down just by stress or that mental workload. And so if a system can take that off of your hands. That seems weird to say off of your hands when you're talking about your brain, but when that mental workload is gone, then it really lets you execute and streamline and just drive to the paperwork or task day by day for the larger items.
Perfect. That makes sense. And you mentioned that you're also helping agents move from paper files to online systems.
Yeah.
What is that like? For somebody at this point today in 2019, if they're still on paper, what does it take to get them online?
Some of them are in their careers. They've been in their careers for 30 plus years, and they have no interest, but they have a need because it's a broker requirement. So they might hire me and say, handle this part of my business. I don't want anything to do with this. I'm enjoying this part of my career, and I've had success. I don't feel like I need to learn more items. Great, happy to do that for you. There is also another client type where they feel intimidated by the technology. They know they need it. They're overwhelmed. There are so many options out there. And then they have these other broker requirements. So it's kind of like deer in the headlights, and then they can also be intimidated by some of the other prop tech platforms or brokerages that are buying out some of their team members or whatnot. And you can start to feel a little marginalized and fear where your career or your industry is going. So that agent would hire me, and we talk about what their game plan is. What are their goals? What do they want to look like? How deep do they want to get into technology? Do they just want to be on the surface, or do they really want to dive in? And then we can strategize from there.
Perfect. It's great that there are people like you out there who can help bridge that technology gap and help people get to that next level. Go ahead.
I was going to say it's fascinating because what I've learned in my intake is that there's a disconnect from just language, terminology, and then also communication styles. So it's really neat that I'm able to help bridge that just based on those, to me, what seems simple, but again, it's by nature what I've been doing on a daily basis.
Right. Well, if people want to learn more about you or connect with you, where can they find you?
They can find me at info@assistant.realestate, and my company name is assistant.realestate, which is also the domain.
Perfect. That's easy to remember. Fantastic. Well, thank you so much for sharing your insight with us today. I really appreciate it.
Thank you, Vanessa.
Talk to you soon.
Thanks for listening to Offer Accepted, the podcast for fostering careers in real estate and growing a successful real estate team. If you like what you heard today, be sure to subscribe, rate, and review. You can also check us out on YouTube. Search Pro R.E.A. Staffing and you'll find this and a ton more content all around hiring and managing your growing real estate team and launching your career in real estate. We'll see you in the next episode.